Stuart, what's your best Pine Marten fact, please?
They take advantage of a great natural process called delayed implantation. So they'll breed during like the late summer, autumn period, and not actually give birth until the following spring. And that just gives them a helping hand because obviously they've evolved during times of harsh winter when the weather's terrible for rearing young. So the young are born at a time when they've got the whole of the spring, summer, and autumn then to develop in time for the next winter.
What's the latest news on Pine Martens in Shropshire?
Well, it's been 9 years almost since Pine Martens were discovered, so we found them on camera, camera traps down in the Clun Valley in South Shropshire a while back. And it looked like the population of Clun was quite stable, so we've moved to another area further north. And the news at the moment is that there seems to be still small pockets of Pine Martens in the really good habitat, so good quality woodland habitat. And the big story is that there's probably a few more out there than we actually realised.
Why are Pine Martens important?
Well, the Pine Martens, like other apex predators, they're basically a key component of any ecosystem and habitat. So where you've got a good population of Pine Martens and a really good big area of habitat, the martens will often keep some of the other smaller mammal species in check, so that they predominantly eat things like voles and mice during the winter. And they're all small animals that have a knock-on effect if they're around in too big a number. So they're like a key factor within that ecosystem, but they're controlling the populations of other animals. They'll eat a lot of seeds during the autumn months, and they actually distribute those seeds against they're like their natural harvesters. They're basically depositing those seeds when they go to the toilet in the forest. And they help the woodland regeneration over time.
Stuart, can you describe Pine Marten conservation in Shropshire today, please?
So a lot of our stakeholders are the big landowners, because and those people are really key for me to talk to, so that we can work out how to manage the woodlands, increase the woodland cover a lot better. But there's also been other stakeholders, such as the National Trust, who are quite big landowners in Shropshire. We've got Shropshire Wildlife Trust. And it's quite an exciting time now in the county, because there's also Vincent Wildlife Trust, who are based down in Herefordshire. They've conducted loads of projects to look at where there's feasibility for releasing Pine Martens, and they've actually released Pine Martens officially from Scotland as part of what we would call a ecosystem improvement. So they're basically translocated to places like Wales and down in the Forest of Dean. We can now work with Vincent Wildlife Trust to see how those martens are doing, because they cover a huge amount of land. And we've had one example of one single male Pine Marten being released over 100 kilometres away down in Gloucestershire. It's actually showed up on camera trap in South Shropshire, so they really do cover a huge area.
Is the Shropshire Pine Marten population stable, increasing or decreasing?
It's still very hard to say, because the project has been quite limited for time resource for a start. So it's been me and just a couple of other people putting cameras out and trying to find the martens. So it's very difficult to put an exact number on the population size in the county. So at the moment, what we do know is that martens are bred, because we've got two Pine Martens show up repeatedly, not on one camera trap, which is obviously a very good sign that you can't dispute. And we've got martens living in 3 or 4 different patches of woodland, which would indicate that as long as they can move around between those woodlands, they're going to meet each other and they'll be able to breed again. But it's obviously a big job, and that's why we've been seeking funding for the next couple of years to work with more landowners, more partners, to increase that spread of monitoring. And the only way we can do that is to put cameras out, because cameras do a lot of work for us. It seems like a bit of a cheaty way of putting cameras out rather than doing the field work. But Marten field signs are particularly difficult to come across. So you don't just walk through the woods in Shropshire and come across a Pine Marten den or a Pine Marten poo, which is a good indicator of Pine Marten presence in Scotland and mainland Europe. So it's down to let's get as many cameras out as possible and cover as big an area of Shropshire as we can possibly get.
What jobs are there with Pine Martens in the UK?
Jobs with organisations like Wildlife Trust, where they've got Pine Marten officer roles, and Vincent Wildlife Trust have recently launched a project called Martens on the Move, which we'll be collaborating with. And a lot of that work as a Pine Marten officer would involve liaising with landowners and the stakeholders, looking at opportunities for further monitoring, and then of course collecting the data, so we can see that there's a good distribution or not a very good distribution of Pine Martens across the like Welsh Marches, Shropshire and Herefordshire area. But they're few and far between, so it's not every day that you come across a job that's specifically related to Pine Martens.
What questions addressing Pine Marten conservation would you like to see answered by the close of the 21st century?
How adaptable are Pine Martens? How impacted are they by like human interference, so human use of land, changes in land use, and to see if that's going to have a knock-on effect to the success of Pine Martens making a full comeback in the UK.
What sort of clothes should prospective volunteers or candidates for a job wear to a job interview?
Again, it all totally depends on the organisation, and I've been lucky enough to work for a conservation organisation, a charity in Shropshire for a while, up until recently. That if you turned up in a suit and wearing a tie, then you would look very out of place. And it tends to be a case actually of suiting the role. So you can imagine if you're going for a field assistant job or in charge of field research, look like you've spent a bit of time outside at least, but not wearing something covered in mud and and bits of birch bark and things like I often am. But certainly just make an effort, but you can also go too far by wearing a posh Armani suit. So I would say, yeah, look like you know what you're doing when you're outside in the field.
What are good questions that newly qualified wildlife biologists can ask at an interview?
I think that the key thing, and I've thought about this quite a lot, is particularly now from reading so many very different books on marten ecology, there's a lot of variation geographically in marten behaviour. So I think a really important question to ask is what opportunities are there to further develop skills, spend a little bit of time working with other people, or at least liaising with other people that are running projects in other parts of the world, just to see what the latest findings are and the latest discoveries, because Pine Martens don't read the books as most mammal species and wildlife species don't. I think having that kind of flexibility to kind of open your own mind to the possibility that martens aren't doing everything that we expect them to do, but you've got to have the opportunity to do that. So it's key to make sure that if you're going for a job, that you're comfortable that you can try innovative new techniques for monitoring, for example, or camera trapping. And there's so many different technologies out there now that are coming out with thermal imaging to even sound recordings, so you can do audio recordings of forests to detect whether or not there's any Pine Marten vocalization. And that's really going to be the way forward. So I think you need to think progressively and make sure that you have got the opportunity to work for a progressively thinking organisation.
Do you take on volunteers, Stuart, for example, to help you check the camera traps?
Yeah, so over the last, well, the project's been going for over 15 years. We've had about 150 volunteers over that time. But it's interesting that for the first 6 years before Pine Martens showed up on camera, we got 15. So all of the other volunteers, there was a huge spike in interest, obviously, once we got the Martens show up on camera trap. And that, for me, has been a key volunteer role. Is if I've got 5,000 clips of the forest on one camera trap, I haven't got time to go through all of those clips. So volunteers are essential in going through footage, logging the sightings of martens. And at the moment, I'm going through a bit of a stage of trying to train other people to actually use cameras. because as things stand at the moment, there's only 2 of us in the county that have recorded martens on camera trap, and we've kind of honed our technique to as much as you can hone a technique with camera trapping. So there's actually quite a little bit of fortune involved as well, just getting the right place at the right time. But not everybody else is setting camera traps up as effectively as they could do. So I'm really keen to, particularly this year, 2024 is the year of the let's step up our camera trapping and get as many people involved as possible.
Do you put out lures or baits or supplementary feeding near the camera trapping station?
Not so much with bait now, but no, the Pine Martens everywhere. I've done camera trapping in Europe and up in Scotland where there's plenty of Pine Marten activity. They all love peanut butter. Now, what you have in Shropshire that you don't have in Scotland and mainland Europe is lots of grey squirrels. And if you put out peanut butter for Pine Martens, it's inevitable that within seconds of you leaving the camera area that there'll be a grey squirrel or a wood mouse feasting on the bait that you put out for the Pine Martens. So in more recent years, I've started to actually use a type of lure which is aniseed based. And it's said that anything that is particularly strong scented could just attract a Pine Marten in front of like a camera's field of view. So it tends to be quite simplistic. It's just a stick in the ground with a blob of lure on top at about 4 meters from a camera. And that often does the job.
What skills and personal qualities does a person need to work with Pine Martens?
You've got to be a particular character, I think, to cope with working outside in all kinds of weathers, and also to be able to conduct field research, have an eye for detail. So a key part of looking for Pine Marten territories would normally be to look for the Pine Marten scats, which we've had to do out in all kinds of weather, absolutely torrential rain and hail, which makes it quite difficult to concentrate on what you're doing. So I think just having that eye, spend loads of time out in the forest whenever you can, because you kind of start to develop this connection in a way. So it sounds a little bit bohemian when I say it, but by connecting to the habitat, you get into the zone and you come across a lot more details. Now that's really important, particularly for the field work. But you're collecting data out in the field and having the ability and the mind to be able to go through figures and numbers of sightings and look at this the statistics is really important, so that we can compare those across other projects and see if figures in Shropshire are matching what they are in places like the Forest of Dean and West Wales. So the analytical mind is of particular importance, I think.
That's brilliant. Stuart, please can you describe how your own career developed?
Well, my career was particularly non-conformist, because I started off with ambitions of working with wildlife, but in a different sense, and that was to actually film wildlife. So I did a degree in filmmaking, so that I could learn all about the techniques of producing wildlife films, and that was my big ambition. Unfortunately, what I found out quite early on after university is that after spending 2 or 3 days trying to find something like an otter, the last thing I ever thought about was pressing record on the camera. I'd just be mesmerised by the wildlife and never end up getting any good footage at all. And I was finding that I was getting no better at it at all. So after a few years of doing various other jobs and volunteering my time in the conservation sector, what I tried to do is develop the skills by working on local nature reserves, other volunteer work parties to do the nature reserve management. And then a little bit later, I started to get involved with the recording groups. I got involved with like dragonfly recording groups initially, dormouse recording groups, and that then led on to me, strangely enough, becoming chairman of the Shropshire Mammal Group a couple of years later, because I was so enthusiastic about everything that was going on. I was really keen to pull all of these enthusiasts together. And I think that volunteer side is key, because that shows that you've got the motivation, I think, to get involved and dedicate a lot of your time to the cause of conservation research. And all of that has snowballed. It tends to build up. You start to get a reputation. In most cases, hopefully a good reputation. And then I found that I was actually offered jobs, so I wasn't always applying for the jobs that I really wanted. I'd often get phone calls going back 10 years, seeing if I was interested in certain roles, and that's how I ended up at Shropshire Wildlife Trust.
Stuart, where do our knowledge gaps lie regarding pine marten conservation in England, and particularly Shropshire?
I think that there's still gaps in our knowledge of where pine martens can adapt to, so the sort of habitats that they're living in, and the proximity as well to human habitation and like farming and agriculture, which up in Scotland there's pine marten populations in vast areas of forest. They're not necessarily coming across commercial agriculture and like livestock grazing in the same quantity as there is in Shropshire. So it's really interesting to look at these opportunities as well to link the woodlands, and this is like a key conservation story at the moment, is that not just for pine martens, for other animals like your dormice, your butterflies and your bees, they all need corridors to be able to move around, like optimal habitat areas of like grassland, like really nice like wildflower meadows and things. And there's not really a lot of knowledge about what corridors might be used by pine martens. So I'm hoping that in Shropshire they're making use of hedgerows, but unless we get the evidence of them using hedgerows, we can't say for sure. So my aim is to try and plug that gap and learn a little bit more about how martens move around.
Stuart, please can you suggest a potential research project for wildlife biology students?
Now, there's always something that we need to know about pine martens. There's opportunities to look at like the diet and the variation in diet, because that is also a key part of working with landowners and also other conservation groups. So a lot of my work in the past has been liaising with people that are running bird monitoring groups, because they're quite stressed that they've put up a load of bird boxes for like pied fly catchers and things like that, and then suddenly there's this pine marten going through and marauding, taking all the birds that they're trying to protect. So the diet, what they're eating is actually really essential. And what I always say is they eat a lot of berries, but they cover a huge area, so they don't always kill everything in that one area, as long as it's a big enough area to support the population. And that's a really key part, that, as I say, for working with landowners, but we don't always have the data in Shropshire to back that up. So I've actually set up I've got the ball rolling with a couple of universities to possibly get students to look for pine marten scats and start to examine what the pine martens have been eating, because camera traps don't always record what the pine martens are eating unless you're very lucky enough to get a marten venturing back to the camera with like a grey squirrel or a blackbird. And that really, again, that's going to be ongoing for the next few years, because like other mustelids, like the otters and polecats, they adapt quite quickly. So it could change from one year to the next, depending on what is most prevalent for them to eat.
I didn't send you this question, Stuart, but we'll go for it anyway. Stuart, which people or meetings or books have most influenced your thinking about pine marten conservation?
Well, there's one chap that really has led the way, and that's Dr. Johnny Burks, and he's now a retired ecologist and a doctor of ecology. So his background in pine marten ecology and research goes back 2 or 3 decades. So he's been an essential source of information through his books, but he's also been incredibly supportive. So where I've had questions or slight contradictions that I've come across from the research that we've done, he's been very keen to help and support what we're doing. And that kind of like also gives me a bit of impetus to carry on, because there's been times during the project where there's been no Marten activity for weeks after we think we hit the jackpot of Pine Marten activity, and just having somebody like Johnny that has been there, done it all before, and to give us a bit of reassurance and enthusiasm for what we're doing, has been a great way of like kick-starting things on when they've started to slow down a little.
Stuart, what advice can you give to any students wanting a career with small carnivores?
I think it goes back to the point that you need experience in the field. So it's very easy, as I know lots of people do, we read the books on certain things, and then we think that we know it all. And having that kind of open-mindedness to not really test the books, but just to like be willing to accept that the wildlife, I mean, the wildlife, as I say, doesn't read the books, that there's a lot of other things happening out there, and it's really important to kind of like combine reading those books with getting out there into the field, looking for the Pine Marten scats, the Pine Marten field signs. And it's not just Pine Martens, of course, there's plenty of other mammal activity. We've got badgers and things, and having a good understanding of the overall like ecosystem and the animals that live there is really important to understanding how Pine Martens function in there too.
Stuart, is there anything that you'd like to add?
At the moment, I think the main thing to add is that the project that I'm running now is just one of several little projects happening around England at the moment, because Pine Martens were presumed to be extinct in England for so long. It's now just kind of getting into the news and into people's consciousness that Martens are back. However they got there, whether or not they were already hiding in the woods and the deepest valleys all along, but they've been bolstered by these population like relocations by the organisations. And I think it's all about collaboration. So what I do for anybody that comes to any of my talks and lectures, or whenever I run any events, is try and find out what other people are doing on Pine Marten research, share all of the stuff that we're doing together, and hopefully by having that network of Pine Marten projects, that the future's going to be bright for Pine Martens, because it can't just be one person.
Stuart, how can people follow your work? Are you on social media?
Yep, so I share a lot of my discoveries and camera trap clips through my X, formerly known as Twitter feed, which is at Pine Martens UK. And I also run the Shropshire Pine Marten Project Facebook group, which can be found just by searching for the group name. And I try and put as many updates on there as possible. And that's been a really useful tool, because the funding started to dwindle last year, so we needed to upgrade camera traps, and camera traps last really well for 2 or 3 years in the field. After the horrendous storms that we've had over the last couple of years, they'd started to deteriorate quite badly. So with that, I launched a crowdfunding initiative late last year, and that's still open. I always encourage little tiny donations to support at least the upgrading and replacement of camera traps.
Stuart, you are a field ecologist and expert on the returning Pine Martens in Shropshire in England. Thank you very much for being on the Practical Animal Channel, Stuart Edmunds.
Thank you very much, John.